Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of All Things God and Country. I am your host, Justin Clearwater, and this is my co-host, Jacob Kitson.
Hello, everyone. Oh, we have the buttons again.
Oh, yeah. And joining us today is our special guest and friend,
And
Gary Wayne.
yes, one.
My
This one,
bad.
this one. Sorry.
I really need a label
He
maker.
does. He just reprogrammed them, so forgive
Yeah,
us.
it's a we got to figure
It
it out.
really is a chore.
But anyway, so Gary's with us again. He's the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Part 1 and 2.
Correct.
And I forgot to get the book, but we had it. We showed last time.
Yes,
Can you
we
look it
did.
up? And we're gonna dive into this conversation today. So, Gary, I thought we would just start at the beginning with the Nephilim, who they are, what they are, where they came from, where did they go, Cotton Eye Joe, the whole deal.
Mount Herman,
Sure.
pack, everything like that.
Pack everything in if we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, by the way, thank you for inviting me back. Happy to be with you guys again. Looking forward to the conversation tonight. And hopefully, we'll connect some more dots and provide some more information and raise a little more curiosity. Um, so if people, if they can see in the background on my camera there's books behind me. One's a brown book. That's book one. The more silver gray one is book two. And you can go to the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, number6conspiracy.com, and you can find out all about those books. I am working on another book, not writing it myself, but contributing a lot to it. And it's actually going to has been written by my publisher. It's going to be going to editing as we speak. I've signed off on it on Sunday. So it's a fiction on the end time and trying to sort of introduce the idea of AI and how
Cool.
prehistory is involved in the end time. So I provide a whole bunch of information on bloodlines and organizations and to help sort of define the characters and make sure there's um, an approach to end time prophecy that fits my chronology. And so it's kind of like the Da Vinci Code. It's fiction, the characters are fiction, but here's how it might play and here's how AI might play out in it. So
So are you a co-writer or
yeah, I'm on as co-author, yes. So
okay.
Cool.
I mean I do rewrite some stuff, but it's he's the novelist, I'm the researcher. So
Cool. And do we have a,
yeah.
a working title or not yet?
Yeah, it's going to be called the unless it gets changed because a lot of books change name and as it starts to head into the editing process. But he's named it the Aprimo Wall, and it's a very interesting word. Just as all of the names and things are very interesting with meanings for people to dig into a little bit more. Um, and that's the AI, the Aprimo Wall. So, and I guess you would probably. It kind of what as I wanted it framed and how it started to come out, it's kind of like a modern hand wall that's recorded in the Book of Daniel.
Hmm.
Okay. Which
Only
would be
with
cool.
When
yeah,
uh
so
The writing on the
when
wall.
might that be coming out?
hopefully it'll be out early in the new year. So
Sweet.
Wonderful. I know what
yeah.
I'm
Can't wait.
asking to pre-order for Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So understanding a little bit about Nephilim will help you understand a little bit about some of the characters and their bloodlines. So where do we start with giants and Nephilim? And so I think the best place to start is just with that word giant and Nephilim. If people aren't familiar with that, that's the generally most used term, or two terms, but they're essentially flip side of the same coin for the same meaning of giants that were in prehistory and before the flood in prehistory, and then again after the flood. And so when we look at that word giant, it is a word that goes back to Greek for gigas, and gigas is the word for giant, and it produced gigantes as its derivative word. And there's gigantes in part of the mythologies with these other creatures that aren't giants, but it they were giant creatures as well, but not giant demigods. And these are demigods as they're produced in polytheism from the gods and human males and females, and in the Bible from the fallen ones and human females. The fallen ones as being the sons of God. So gigantes in the plural would have a would be Ents for gigantes in the plural, and would be Antes in the singular. The meaning of that is that when you have a couple of vowels after the G, in this case the E, it turns that sound to a Y. So it's giantes. And then you get the shortened version that gets transliterated into English for giant. Just so that people know, it doesn't necessarily just mean earthborn, which gigantic or can mean from gigantes. That's the singular form. But you also have the giantes as because there's multiple of them. And they are earthborn as God's born in the earth, as that meaning is, but the source word is giant, Gaius, and Gaius in the plural. So Nephil is the Hebrew word for giant, and Nephilim is the I am male plural for multiple giants. And they come from the sons of God that we would understand as fallen ones or fallen angels biblically, but we don't get that term fallen angels in the Bible anywhere. And it's sort of assumed because they rebelled and they would have fell from heaven like Satan did. And I think that's exactly where the term fallen ones, so an error message I'm getting rid of here. That shouldn't be there. Um, the fallen ones name comes from actually what happens in Isaiah 14 to Satan when he fell from heaven. And that's the Hebrew word nephal. And to get one, you add on the I am male plural, and you get fallen one in the singular and fallen ones in the plural.
I like that.
And yeah, and Nephilim is the source word for Nephilim, which is perfection because they're the parents. They're the celestial mafia godfathers that are producing through human females these giants. So Nephilim is a derivative of the source word, just as the actual giants, the actual Nephilim, are derivatives of the fallen ones. And so that happens in the preamble to the flood story. It provides you the context for the flood story. I won't go through all of the details in terms of uh, what level of violence and what level of corruption was, but this is all happening under the regime of the giants before the flood. And they usurp the whole world under their power because they're not giants that are 7 feet tall. They're not giants that are 8 or 9 feet tall. These are antediluvian giants. And I won't go as far as some people will because I can only, from my research, say 20 to 40 feet tall. But nonetheless, that's monstrous. And then after the flood, the tallest one two I can find is 19 feet tall. But still, even though smaller after the flood, these are giant beings that were provided an immortal spirit by the fallen ones, the Nephilim of the Shemaim, the heavenly ones. Shema, singular, is heaven. The Shemaim are the heavenly ones or the heavens, as we understand that with the sky and the heaven above and underneath the firmament, because heaven is defined, or Shemaim is three heavens, one where God is, one outside the firmament, and what's inside the firmament. So but these are the heavenly ones who are allegorized as stars, right? So when we look in the Bible, whether it's the New Testament or the Old Testament, a star is an allegory for an angel in the right context, that it's not talking about the actual stars. But we're told not to worship the stars because they represent each of the angels when they were created. And so that's the host of heaven as well. Saba, an army or a rank of order. So there's a rank and order of angels, both loyal and disloyal. And it's the ones who rebel under Satan are the ones who create the giants. And it's a violation against the laws of creation. And in doing so, it also passes on a counterfeit spirit, which is likely two violations against the Holy Spirit, which isn't forgiven. One is counterfeiting the spirit that's being passed on. And the other one is the damage they're doing with all the violations to creation that affects the spirit that comes from the Holy Spirit for all of those. And there's different kinds of spirits. There's angelic spirits, there are human spirits, there are these counterfeit spirits, and there are spirits of the animals. They're all distinct. And they're defined in the original languages in Greek and in Hebrew, the Old and New Testament, that way. So we need to understand there's different kinds of spirits, and that these giants multiplied in great numbers, and they usurped the kingships and the governmentship and dominated the top two classes both before and after the flood. So they become the Elim, the elite, elites. El is the word for God or an angel. And when you have an I am plural as it's manifested in a bloodline, that's a majestic bloodline from the Watchers.
And
And
who for people, because the Watchers is a term that you get from uh where do you pull the term the Watchers from for the people who may not be
yeah,
familiar?
so it's a term that's used in the Book of Enoch. It's a term that's used in occult circles around the world in religions. It's even used in the alien mythos, but it
Yes,
is
yes.
also in the Bible. And in Daniel 4, it's used 4 times. And these are angels that come from the presence of God, and they're responsible for religion and, if I can use that term in terms of the belief in God, and um, how governance is going to work. So in Daniel 4, there's instructions coming down by a group of watchers, and these would likely be the seraphim watchers who are assigned that sort of role for government and religion. And these are dragon, serpent-faced angels. They have 6 wings and a serpent's head. And within the rebellious ones, you have most of the gods in the ruling class as serpentine or reptilian. And you might have other giants that are in the warrior class, which would be a lot of seraphim offspring as well, but those would be probably coming from other uh, watchers. And there's 4 groups of watchers. There's the seraphim that we've talked about. There's the cherubim, which have 4 faces, a lion, an eagle, a bull, and a human's head. And Ophanim, which has 1 face of a cherubim, so slightly different. And where do we get that? Well, we don't get it in the English translation. We get it out of the book of Enoch as one of those groups, and it's spelled Ophanin. Sometimes it has 2 N's on it. So we actually get it in the original Hebrew. So in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, you have the cherubim that are pulling the chariot of God in this vision. And then you have these concentric wheels that are going around underneath the throne of the chariot. And that word is Gilgal, as in Gilgal Raphaim, also a word for giant coming out of the Hebrew. That's at the foot of Mount Hermon, the wheel of the giants or the wheel of the spirits, because Rapha is also a demonic spirit, and it comes out of the source word Rapha, to heal. And so it's 7495 Rapha, to heal; 7496 Rapha, the demon, evil spirits of the dead; 7497 is the giant. And there's 2 words giants that are used in the Bible, Rephaim and Nephilim. Rephaim is used 25 times in the Old Testament after the flood. Nephilim is used 1 time in Genesis 6:4, twice in Numbers 13:33, which either is a mistranslation of giant as Nephilim, where some people will argue it's Nephilim there, which would be the fallen ones. So the Anakim are the sons of the fallen ones, not the giants. I'm good either way. I don't fall dogmatic on it. The character is almost identical because Nephilim is the source word. But we do get a passage in Deuteronomy 2 where it's listing some of the post-Diluvian giants, where the Anakim are Raphaim giants. As you take that back to the Hebrew. So again, that just lends support. It's either a complete embellishment to terrorize the Israelites to not go into the land, or it's should have been translated as fallen ones. But I think I like better it as giants there because they were trying to scare the Israelites, and it's the evil part of the report. So when we look at these these giants, oh, one other time giant shows up is in the book of Job, chapter 16, where Gibborim is translated as giant. And Gibor is the word mighty one, as it shows up most of the times to describe giants most of the time, used in the Old Testament. So yeah, when we start to look at the relationship here in terms of the giants and the flood story and their creation and their association with human beings, we go back to the point where I kind of got down on this rabbit trail that not only did they usurp the kingships, but they also imposed their polytheist religion on the world. We know that as it comes down to us as Enochian mysticism. And Enochian mysticism, as people like John Dee or Francis Bacon would have utilized it as, but not associated with Enoch, son of Jared in the Bible, of the Sethian line, but Enoch, son of Cain. And there's two Enochs.
Bad
And
Enoch.
so an evil Enoch and a good Enoch. And that would be also understood as the antediluvian religion of Zoroastrianism that also crosses the flood to become the religion of the Indo-Aryans, the giants that survive the flood or are recreated or both after the flood. And as we recognize Zoroastrianism, it populated itself in the Indus Valley with a Sanskrit version, and then you have the Avesta version, which is the Persian version, and linking back into the Indo-Aryans with their migration into those valleys shortly after the flood. So this is the organizational structure that's going on after the flood that's going to enslave humankind, and they've been created by the fallen angels to destroy humanity, to wipe them from the face of the earth, so that we do not reach our destiny. And so they get very close to doing that, which brings the flood, which is why the giants are in the preamble for the context for the flood story. And that in the end time, we're told to learn about the days of Noah because it's going to be like that, both before and after the flood. Both before, because you have watcher angels and other angels that have rebelled that are walking amongst humans before the flood, and then again after the flood with the offspring gods who take over for the parent gods who are sent to the pit prison. In polytheism, they're killed. You can't kill something that's immortal.
No.
Maybe God can through the lake of fire, which is the destiny and the fate, or more like the fate for the fallen ones. And the parent gods are succeeded by their offspring gods. So what do I mean by that? It's key to understanding prehistory and history. So parent gods rule before the flood, offspring gods after. And in polytheism, they killed their parents to take over. So you have Zeus as an offspring god ruling after the flood, and you have Kronos ruling before the flood. Some say Uranus, could be both, likely the same name for the same god. They had multiple names, just as Baal has multiple names as an offspring god after the flood, and his parent is El in the Canaanite, and he takes over and El dies as well. And then, so you have giants walking before the flood. You have this expansion of knowledge that we're just catching up to today before the flood. You have angels walking amongst us, fallen angels, and you have the same thing going on immediately after the flood. And also a return of the giants through likely a second incursion and possibly some surviving. So it starts to be the Rosetta Stone, understanding Genesis 6, 1 through 4 for the Bible and our reason for being. And we need to understand it in that concept and in the also understand it through the polytheist lens as well as the monotheist lens because they track the same events just through that polytheist lens. So Zeus created Hercules from Alcmene, to create the Herculean kings, the Gyges king, the Gygus kings, the giant kings, the
Right.
tyrants, Tyrannos, where that comes from, also part of the giant Nephilim um, a definition as giant, tribe of giant for Nephilim, and tyrant as well as bully. The gods in prehistory were known as bulls, as an allegory, as strong as a bull, and they're
Bulls of
quite
Bashan.
yeah, the bulls of Bashan, and their offspring, the giants, both before and after the flood, are understood as bulls. And so when you have Jesus being mocked on the cross by the bulls of Bashan, now you're talking about both the rebellious angels and the disembodied spirits of the giants, let alone everything else that'll be associated with the bulls of Bashan. And they're called that in the Ugaritic texts as the gods as bulls. They're called that and their offspring as bulls as well. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one more example to underline what I'm talking about, the fertility bull goddess, Nin, through Lugal Banda, the king of Uruk, creates Gilgamesh. So you have a bull as a god and goddess in this case, and then Gilgamesh is described as a bull, as a wild bull, as strong as a bull, as is Enkidu is created in exactly the same sort of way. So we get the definitions, and now we have the Gyges Herculean bloodline that's intermixed from um, from Hercules, because the Herculean bloodline comes from the root word Hercules, is the word they use for the Hercules bloodline, and he's the offspring of Zeus and Alcmene after the flood. And you have Gyges kings, giant kings named Gog and Magog. That was a common name for those kings within that reign. And those kings were located in Assyria. They were located in Asia Minor, in southern Greece, and in northern Greece. And a lot of them were dark-haired giants versus the red-haired and the blonde-haired ones. So interesting connections as we look at this worldwide view, and that these giants are considered gods, as demigods, as we defined that earlier. And they're to be worshipped as gods because they're the descendants of the gods. They're the offspring of the gods with the divine right to rule that they're given from the council of the gods, or Nippur, as it would be understood in Sumerian tradition, or Mount Olympus. So all of these stories, including the Atlantis story with Poseidon through Clydo creating 10 demigod kings before the flood, is telling the same story. And so we get accounts both before the flood and after the flood in polytheism all around the world on all continents, telling the same story about the same creatures doing the same things, worshiping the same religion and sets of gods. So that the pantheon should be sort of understood as, in terms of the top seven at least, as being the same around the world, just different vernacular names. So Osiris and Zeus, Baal, Enki would all be the same god, Marduk. And they all do this similar types of things. And it's a bit of a counterfeit as that offspring or as a son of the god for killing Leviathan, as we would understand it. So like, Marduk, for example, is going to kill, it's either Tiamat or Lotan. And you're going to have Virta kill Indra kill Virta, the Leviathan type god and creature in the Vedas. So you're going to have these Leviathan creatures that are killed by a god in all continents all around the world. So again, it's part of that counterfeiting, but it's also part of the same telling of the same events, just through the polytheist lens. So these are doing the bidding of their creators, the gods and the fallen angels, the giants. And they've been created to destroy humankind so that the fallen angels don't get blood on their hands, because they know the power of the God Most High. There's a line that they don't want to cross, at least at that point. And so it's up to the giants to do it and destroy humans and the earth in the process.
Uh,
And so, yeah, go ahead.
I just had one question. Cain, when he was cursed and uh came into the land, do you think those were Nephilim then?
Well, in polytheism, that's what they would say, that Cain is the offspring of Satan and or other angels, because there's a few different accounts, and Eve. And we get that from some beliefs in Christianity as well. Although I'm not against it. I can't really get there because it creates too many contradictions, particularly in the Hebrew language and how they do their translations to change the meaning. And I just can't make any sense of it as I do their translations with even within the sentence a lot of times in it.
Do you
And
believe in the two? Because it says he went outside of Nod, or he went to Nod, and there he took a wife.
yep.
Are you of the opinion it was a relative, or is it a external creation that's not Adamic? Because it says he's marked so that the kings
Yeah.
of the earth don't hurt him. That's a similar cross reference to Ezekiel when it says the kings of the earth laughed. So are the kings of the earth the same in that context as um, maybe not, yeah, like I don't know, Edenic, like early rulers that weren't of the Adamite line is what I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah, well, I would imagine there would be leadership amongst those people, whether or not they're giants or whether or not they're humans or similar to humans. So, and there's people already there when Cain gets there, and that is completely at odds with when people should show up from the standard dogma because, you know, when we look at the ostracization of Cain and the creation or mention of other peoples, except for that account that he runs into, there are no more Adamites until
So,
130 years,
yeah.
until Adam becomes 130 years old. And he creates Seth to replace Abel that was murdered by Cain. And then only some time later are other daughters and sons born, which aren't named. So you start to get out of order, and there doesn't seem to be that much time that evolves with the creation of Adam and Eve to the ostracization and then the birth of Cain. And with the birth of Cain, he's doing as is Abel, they're doing the first fruit offerings, one of animals and one of wheat and grass and fruit that's being grown in early adulthood, which is 20 to 40 years old in the Jewish Israelite tradition. So even if you allow 40 years and then another 20 to 40 years, you're only at 80 years. You're not anywhere near 130 years. And he finds a wife right off the bat. So they're either go with that Cain is going to intermarry amongst the giants, or what I would prefer is sorting out the other details in Genesis 2 versus Genesis 1, where they don't coexist properly.
Are you
And that,
speaking of when it mentions that in chapter one, things such as God created man and woman in his image, and then it goes and speaks of the narrative of Adam and Eve's creation?
yes.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, and that would be one of the details where you have male and female being created, and not just with two, but in multiple numbers and told to spread out around the world as nomads and settle the earth. And you have Adam born in singular, having breath breathed into him. Now, that could be just additional detail if that was the only sort of additional detail, because that's not technically in contradiction, but it does infer something more might be going on. And it's also at the introduction of Jehovah the Elohim in 2:4. So then you have Eve created sometime later from the rib. Well, that's completely at odds with what is going on in day 6. And if people were created in multiple, why wasn't a partner found that was appropriate for Adam? It makes, again, no sense. And then the creation order is wrong. You also have the people in day 6 that are permitted to eat from any tree of the world, but Adam and Eve are restricted from one tree. It's again that is not a that is not additional information. That's in contradiction to what was permitted in day one. And you have Adam being placed in a garden, not told to multiply around the earth. And again, those are just a few of the differences. And in my way of approaching the Bible, which is, shouldn't be contrarian, is that the Bible can't contradict itself.
Amen.
So if that's the case, then it sounds like there's two creations.
And I've always asked people to just simply think of any other chapter in the scripture, Genesis through Revelation, where it goes backwards after telling something.
Usually not
Yeah.
backwards completely. It'll add more
Right.
information is the MO.
Right, like Kings and Chronicles does.
Yeah.
But there's no other like narrative story,
Yeah.
recounting story. I don't like to use that word in the scriptures that it goes backwards to go forward.
Yeah. And so I look at this as a second creation there, and Eden should not be looked at as day 8 because we're not told day 8. But now it starts to explain who the people are that Cain would find, because they spread out all over the world, and Cain goes east of Eden, which is the Nile to the Euphrates. So he's going to go further into what we would understand as Sumer or Shinar in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And he finds a wife, and then he builds a city for who?
Right. And somebody took the science or the sacred things of Eden that Adam had
Yeah.
taught them to other lands.
Yeah. Now, how this also connects back to Cain and giants is that on day 6, but before humans are created in plural, you have all the beasts of the field that are being created. In Genesis 3, the serpent, the Nahash, is a beast of the field. There's a possibility here as we link in what I think is a very good template. Rosetta Stone for understanding some of the prehistory is 2 Peter 3, where it says in the beginning, and they're talking about a planet in the water, out of the water. I won't go into that part of the detail, but a day is like 1,000 years for humans. So all of a sudden now you could have 7,000 years, and then who knows how long afterwards does the Eden account happen? And there's almost like a restart
Yes.
to creation there because something may have went wrong. Because of the different order of creation and the different commission. So when we look at the people of day 6, it would look like, and anything else created there before humans, who in this scenario would be created at the end of the 1,000 years, were corrupted by the fallen angels. Right? And we're already following God. Now let's go back to the Nahash. He was the beast of the field, which would have been up to 1,000 years before. Nahash, as you take that back to its root word, Nahash basically means a sorcerer, wizard, necromancer, priest of polytheism. Kind of describes that he is going to be part of the religion of the fallen angels. And I'm not saying Satan's not involved, but this was a walking, talking, intelligent beast of the field that is going to deceive Eve and then Adam to eat from the tree that they're not permitted to eat from, the only law. Of course, when they eat that, that's when sin enters the world. And there was no law before Adam was created. So anything before that is imputed. It's not in effect, as we're taught in the book of Romans, right?
So kind
that's
of
why
a cosmic legal loophole, so to say.
yes, yeah. I'm not saying evil things weren't going on, but the law wasn't in place.
Right. So the
Right?
can't
So
defile
sin
what's
enters the
not
world.
applicable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So sin enters through one man, Adam, because of that.
Uh-huh.
So
That's kind of the
now,
narrative I've always understood from
yeah,
reading scripture as well, is
yeah,
the two the interlude, right, of time between the two.
yep,
And just the difference. It always hooked me, and even reading it in the KJV as a kid, and he went to the land east of Nod, and there he took a wife and he knew
yeah,
her.
yeah.
And you can't make babies with somebody if there's nobody to make
Yeah,
babies with.
yeah. Or did he do, I mean, or you're expected to believe some other species or something.
Right.
So,
Like you're
but
very limited in option in a
if you
literal
Yeah, but the
reading.
only scripture we have are these two different creations. That's the only thing that we can sort of go back to try and sort it out from a biblical perspective and not from an outside biblical, where you can go through all sorts of different sort of speculations. And so what's interesting is it's this serpent that is punished, not Satan. But people will say, but Satan is a serpent, as he's called in Revelation 12, and a dragon. He's also the devil. And yes, he had aspects of a seraphim angel, but he had other aspects of an angelic creatures as well. He was also an archangel, as an archon. He was also, as you take the English and the New Testament back to the Greek. But Ezekiel 28 is very enlightening because they'll say that's where he was in Eden, and I don't disagree with that. But he wasn't there as a serpent. How do we know that? Because he's classified as cherubim, as the anointed cherubim that also walked amongst the fiery stones. Who walks amongst the fiery stones? The seraphim. This is a unique being that's higher than all the other angels, that has multiple aspects, and including perhaps high priest, just as he's described with 9 jewels, not as many as the Levites with 12, but it's the priesthood that Jesus is going to replace because he's immortal in the future time with the Melchizedek order. So he has multiple, but he is a cherubim when he's in Eden, according to the Bible. He's not the seraphim. So he may be the avatar with the serpent as his avatar, just as he entered into Judas to give him courage. He may have given the wisdom to do the deception. That's a possibility. Or maybe he coached them, coached the Nahash to do it. I'm not saying he wasn't involved. I'm just saying he's not a serpent as he's described in Ezekiel 28 as the one being in Eden. And what's also interesting is the book of Enoch has something interesting to say on this. And I know it's not canonized, but when it runs in the same direction with the same details, I
And
think we should.
quoted from by more than one person in the New
Yes,
Testament.
yeah. Well, at least Jude. So, um, and with an exact quote. So there, I mean, there's obviously a book of Enoch, whether this one is been corrupted or not to a certain degree. But there's an angel that is said to be in Eden, and his name is Gadrael. Well, that's rather interesting. It doesn't show up LL. It doesn't show up as Samael. Uh, so who is this angel that's in Eden named Gadrael? And of course, we don't have an original Hebrew manuscript, so we can't check everything. But as with Ophan and Ophanim, you can take that back to the original Hebrew, just as you can take Gadrael back. And Gadrael is partly the allegory for the Freemasons with the large G. Um, and so Gadrael actually means wall of God or God's wall in Hebrew. And just as you have the mystical Jewish people in Kabbalism, for example, calling Samael the seraphic or seraphim form of Satan, now we have Halel, which is the morning star order, which is in Isaiah 14, Halel ben Shakar, not Lucifer, son of the morning. Lucifer is an Italian word substituted into the English language for a Hebrew word. It should have been like Michael is translated directly, but we try and get the meaning there where you wouldn't do that with any other angel, but we do it with Lucifer, which is makes no sense. So, anyways, Hallel is part of the morning star order that we see as an order in Job 38, 4 through 7, where the sons of God, angels, and the morning stars celebrated the creation that God had made, and obviously before the rebellion. And so he has a cherubic form with likely the name Gadrael, because we have an actual Hebrew word there to take that back to, that may be one of his names and titles. And he may have had up to 7 different names and titles. It was not unusual for gods of the pantheon to have that many titles. So, so you don't have Satan being punished. And if he created through Eve a giant, he should probably go to the pit prison for the same crimes as the other angels, but he didn't. Now, that may be a reprieve to the end time, where he goes for 1,000 years, um, as part of a legal, let's say, plea deal, to
Like
be
that.
the adversary, but we don't have any scripture that says he produced Eve. That's all ad-libbed through interpretation. That doesn't fit with other details, even within the book of Genesis. So, yeah, there could be giants before Genesis 6, but we don't have scripture for that. Again, I'm not against it. So when you have the serpent seed in Genesis 3:15, people are going to say, well, that's going to be the offspring, of Satan that produces Cain, right? Possibly, but if it wasn't Satan who was punished and didn't actually bring down Adam and Eve, and that individual is punished, and that word serpent is Nahash, it's not Seraph, it's not a word like Diablos or anything like that that would be associated. It's Nahash. It's the same being, and that's going to be either understood as a interpretive to belief systems or a spiritual thing, or it's a curse prophecy. It would be a curse prophecy like Ham's curse for violating either Ham's wife or Ham, depending on how you want to translate that out of the Hebrew, that is going to put an unborn son of Ham, Canaan, in bondage thereafter, subservient to other nations. And so it's a curse with the authority of God that will be fulfilled through a prophecy. So I think the serpent seed is fulfilled through watcher angels, the seraphim in Genesis 6, which is where we sort of began the discussion on the angels. And it's the serpent root as it extends through into end time prophecy, in Isaiah 14, again, at the end of the Satan falling from heaven prophecy, where you have both Nahash and Seraph being used. And when it's a flying poisonous serpent, that is Seraph or Seraphim, as you would take that back. So I think the serpent root is one of the definers of the serpent seed. And I think the watcher angels are the other aspect. And this serpent seed is going to be at odds with humankind all throughout our destiny, not just till the flood, unless you think Cainites survived the flood, right? So again, this happens again after the flood. It continues right through to the end time. We might know these better as the terrible ones that are talked about in Ezekiel 32. And in Ezekiel 32, you have these terrible ones that are in the pit prison, in the sides of the pit prison. It's not the fallen angels because they're named as well. When it says, the strong ones there, that's the Hebrew El for angels that are in the pit prison. These ones are mighty ones, Gibor, Gibborim, that are talking to another mighty one, the Pharaoh, a royale, a king of God, a king of the angels, an offspring of the angels. And so he's talking with them, and these are the terrible ones that are talked about in Isaiah 25 as a branch of the terrible ones that are going to be dealt with in the end time at the foot of a mountain, likely Mount Hermon. It's also the seed line that's talked about in Psalms 21 through 8 in the time of wrath and fire, where that fruit and that offspring is going to be removed from the seed of humankind in the time of wrath. This is that seed line that is being talked about all the way through. I can bring up in that passage and quote it if you want.
No, you've
Yeah.
cited yourself very well. So correlation question for Ezekiel. Um, the fallen ones who intermingled with humanity are chained and bound. And so you're saying that Lucifer did not, or Satan did not partake in that area, and by extension, like his judgment is a you're going to get caught kind of thing down the road because of your minions judgment. And so that passage in Ezekiel is the minions speaking to the masters that are locked up. Um, do you believe that kind of stuff is still going on right now in regards to relationship to how after the flood, um, they're calling the shots kind of thing.
Yeah, so in the time of Ezekiel, that would place us at about 600 BC. Plus or minus 10 years. I'd say less than the 10 years, but um, so at that point in time, well after the flood, well
Right.
after the creation, you still have this conversation that's going on with Pharaoh, with the terrible ones who brought terror while they were in the land of the living. And when they were killed, they were sent directly to the pit prison as a disembodied spirit of a giant. So I can't explicitly say that communication can go on today, but we have precedents in the Bible that it can. Whether it still goes on, because we have seen more restrictions put on the fallen ones as time has gone through um, to ensure that things can play out so that all the names in the book of life will have an opportunity to leave their names in that book of life or have it blotted out, the book that was created from before creation. So, and what do I mean by some restrictions? Well, if you go with after the flood, the giants are no longer able to be born with a counterfeit spirit going forward from Genesis 6:3. Within the Genesis 6:1 through 4 passage, life will be limited to 120 years so that the bodies aren't going to last. That's a restriction. And the giants don't seem to be as big or as gifted as the ones before. And so we have the offspring gods that take over and then they disappear. And then we don't seem to get that same type of interaction and violations that are happening after Babel. And so there just seems to be a pattern of some restrictions being put on. Now, I think that could be just out of fear because the consequences go higher. Maybe it's directly to the lake of
Right.
fire. And so they're less likely to to cross that until the end time. Or there's going to be some restrictions that are lifted in the end time for them to do some more horrible things. So yeah, so I think there's a possibility there.
Okay, so in relationship to the mighty ones in after the flood, to kind of bring in another topic you have a plethora of information on is they kind of have vassals, right? They have individuals and rulers, and we see that with the Pharaoh, him speaking as a ruler to these people. So
Yeah.
they're we see it, with the kings of Europe and the world and the intermingling and all of that with bloodlines and things. What is the relationship between bloodlines and the Gilbarim and the fallen after the flood?
Yeah, so you have giants that are created after the flood or survive or both. I lean heavily towards second creation, and the Baalim Council seems to be the source for that, as we understand that biblically through the Ugaritic text, in terms of the Baalim being mentioned in both, and the Baalim creating the Raphaim. And the Raphaim is the term used for giant mostly after the flood, depending on whether or not you think Numbers 13:33 is an embellishment when it says the Anakim are giants or Nephilim. Um, so when we look, so when we look at that sort of aspect, just give me the question again. I kind of lost my focus there.
That's okay. It was kind of a long question.
Yeah.
How do the bad powers that be between the fallen ones and their offspring after the flood,
Right. Right.
how do they continue to operate in this world in
Yep.
relationship to the mighty ones
Yep.
that would be a modern sense with bloodlines and things of that
Yeah.
nature?
So let's reestablish the hierarchy, invisible and visible, on a sort of a general basis here after the flood. You have the Baleen Council ruling from Mount Hermon, which are the gods, the invisible ones. The visible ones will be the assembly of the Detanu that report to the Baleen Council, which are the tribes of giants, Rephaim. And Gibborim is actually listed as a tribe in the Ugaritic text, GBR in the original Semitic. Just as RPM would be the original Rephaim, NPL would be the original Nephilim. And so you have that divine right to rule being handed out through the divine councils there to rule over the world. And so when the people of Babel move away from Babel and migrate around the world, they're going to move in amongst the giants. But the giants are, because of their size, they're going to dominate the top two classes again and do the exact same thing they did after the flood. And so Pharaoh is going to be a direct descendant of the post-Diluvian giants as they established kingship again after the flood. Now, they do not have the same ability to reproduce like the ones did before, seemingly another restriction. And that seems to be, and we get that through, again, the terrible ones definitions in Ezekiel 32, where you get all these descriptions that would apply to a giant, but also childless and infertile. So there's a lack of amount of babies being birthed, and it seems to be manifested in the lack of females.
Okay. A lot of dudes.
And yeah, and so that's why they started new dynasties after the flood with a female, a pureblood female. And we get an example of that in Genesis 36 with the Horim giants, as they're listed as giants in Deuteronomy 2 in the Edom area where Esau and his descendants are going to move. And Esau's son Eliphaz is going to marry Timnah, a Horim giant female, to create the Amalekites, a hybrid human giant one, which would have been 7 to 9 feet tall, that lived amongst the giants, but not to be confused with the Amalekites, which should be translated Amalekim in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants, because there's 200 years difference. So you can't have a tribe showing up 200 years and a few generations before the patriarch comes. So Amalek is the son of Timnah and Eliphaz, and he's named after the Amalekim giants who live in Petra, whom the Amalekites are going to move and live amongst, right?
Okay, so intermingling.
Yes. So they have to intermarry with humans lest they go extinct. And that's where you start to get these hybrids over time. And they're going to create, obviously, whether it's through ways of, let's say, pouring semen into human females to do the first generation, or they were small enough after the flood to make it work because they were, anywhere from 9 to 19 feet tall. Most of the ones in the Covenant land, the largest one we can cite is Og, who would have been somewhere between 12 and 15 feet tall. Goliath would have been 11 feet 3 inches tall. So either they had to do the first generations, a little bit of artificial insemination, so to speak, through the rituals, or they're able to copulate. Either way, they're going to need human females to reproduce because there's not enough giant females. There's a few, but not many. And we have another example. Actually, Esau marries Aholibama, that Horim as well. So he's actually creating the Horite giants, 7 to 9 feet, hybrid giants versus the Horim, which is why you have two different terms for Horim showing up. You might even have that as the translators interpret that in the KJV with the Anakites, because the Anak, Anakim, and Anakites are all used for the same Hebrew word. So they may have been talking at times about some hybrid giants, or maybe they just were completely inconsistent in terms of how they did their translations that they made no apologies for and said they wouldn't apologize for. So it's at times you just have to say, hey, look, it's the Hebrew word that we're looking at. Whatever they're inferring, we don't know how reliable that is, but we do have reliability in the Hebrew word. So you're going to have more and more intermarriage as this becomes very, very common with the issue of we have to continue to produce more because these are warrior creatures. They're losing warriors all the time, fighting each other and fighting humans. And so it's one of these things where they have to continue to intermarry, and as they do so, um, they lose some of their giant traits and they lose some of those other traits that were physical. They take on more and more human. But they're going to track those genealogies for the purity of that stock. And the most pure of the bloodlines, and the one that might be ennobled by other giant bloodlines of pure stock, would have a higher setting in the culture of the royales. And if people say that's not EL there, understand Baal can also be spelled Bael, but AL is a transliteration of EL for an angel
Right.
or a god. And when we look at the royales, they actually take their genealogies all the way back to a specific Nephilim, and in some cases, Rephaim or vice versa, depending on which royale might be talking about, um, and to a specific fallen angel or a god, and that's who they receive their divine right through to reign over. So they populated the top first two classes throughout history and kept humans uneducated and poor, and only permitted a small entrepreneurial class in the third class of bakers and blacksmiths and tailors and things like that. But anything large that we would understand in the old term, as we see come back today, the oligarch companies that controlled the big business, the big trade, was done through the first two classes. Of the Elim, the elites, the Indo-Aryans, which is means noble ones, the nobility. They've populated that all the way through our history and suppressed the history to be used only in ways that fits their agenda. The fortunate thing for humans to a certain degree is that they are all rivals to each other, and that doesn't allow them to come together sort of the way that you would think that they would have been able to do so, because they all know that there can only be one family that's eventually going to rule as the dragon messiah.
And so, in a current context, where are, like, just name a few of the bloodlines that are active in the world that would be descendants of these people that are kind of out, that are in the open. And you were saying something, one of the medieval things they do teach us, because you could correct me if I'm wrong, but there is like a divine cosmic law that they have to adhere to, that they cannot break. They kind of told us in the Middle Ages the divine right of kings kind of thing. So they weren't
Yeah,
just saying that to pull it out of the air. They were claiming that because of the base of Mount Hermon. And I mean, that layers Jesus's
yeah,
comments as well. But they
yeah,
were claiming something from a source material. So those
yeah.
guys exist today, and they still claim the authority over us, whether it's in the form of the first two classes, like you're saying. So, who would be some of those that occupy those first two classes that the audience may be familiar with on a visible level of
Yeah.
society?
Well, the most visible ones, and who knows whether or not they're actually in the top 13 of the old names or not, because they could still be in the background. But I think likely some of the royals, as we understand them today, that are visible, like King Philippe Bourbon of Spain, who holds the King of Jerusalem title, um, it would be one, and he's the head of the uh, Anjou Masonic order, the Royal Order of the Golden Fleece. And for people who aren't familiar with the Golden Fleece, that's the material that the gods and the demigods used to make their clothes, that their bodies would last longer, wouldn't get old and decay. You have, the Norse bloodline of Odin in the Royal Order of the Knights of the Seraphim, and it's really not too hard to imagine why they named themselves Knights of the Seraphim. You have the Order of the Garter of the senior order versus the junior order. That is the King of Spain, King Charles III. who, when he was Prince Charles, said that he takes in part his genealogy all the way back to Vlad the Impaler, who Dracula was based on, meaning son of a dragon, who drank blood like the Nephilim did. And he was an Indo-Aryan noble Celt or a noble Scythian. And he had red hair, hazel eyes, pale skin, uh, some sort of not an allergy, but a sensitivity to light. He did rituals and blood drinking and educated at the mystery school in Vienna, as most, all royals have a special education. And that Vlad the Impaler was part of the order of, it's known as Ordo Dracanos, or um, Sarkani Rond, as it's also known. And understand that dragon, when you take that back to Dracont, and Draconta in Greek means a watcher angel. I mean, you can't get any more obvious. And that allegory of dragon, Dracula, son of a dragon, as Dracula is defined as, is the patriarchal allegory of the bloodline of giants. Fairy is the matriarchal bloodline that Timna would have been part of, or Guinevere, as the fairy queen in King Arthur, who is son of Uther Pendragon, as both descendants of the Tuatha De Danann giants are fair folk, fairy folk, the Shay people. So when we look at Vlad the Impaler, who does he come from? Well, that family took their bloodlines back to two different sources. One of them goes back to the Agrassi tribe of the Scythians, Indo-Aryans, giants after the flood. That is a tribe created by Hercules, who we covered off earlier, who produced the Herculides bloodline of the giant kings like Gog and Magog after the flood that was in Assyria, Asia Minor, southern Greece, and northern Greece, and was the offspring of the Cretagens, which is the gens of Zeus. KRT was the original Semitic for Crete. Zeus spent a lot of time on Crete. and and that Zeus married or took a consort named Alcmene to produce Hercules. So they keep these genealogies in place so that they know where they fit. And they encode all of that into their coat of arms. And they have angelic beings all over the coat of arms, as well as other heraldic taciturn imagery. So when you see a dragon on a coat of arms, that's representing a seraphim watcher angel that it's going back to.
Okay, so um, in a modern era, so King Charles III
Yep.
of England and the UK, they claim all like through I want to say it's Ephraim, they claim their descendancy through as well, and things of that nature. So their claim to the fallen is there, but also there's a claim that they try to claim to the legitimacy of the Adamic, or
Yes.
the truth of God. So we see this intermingling, of course, which is the deception of the enemy. But uh, so in that situation with that, like his I believe great grandmother, great great grandmother, Victoria, was the mother of, I believe it was 10 different people who would go on and be rulers or consorts to others. So is that an example of them in real time, maintaining a purity of their hybridized bloodline to ensure the continuation, but they have things like hemophilia and other weaknesses that could be another limitation, or
Habsburg jaw. Yep.
the Habsburg jaw, things like, yeah,
Yep.
the things like that. That poor guy.
Yeah.
But so in that sense, these rulers or whatnot, they are the corrupted in the flesh, right? So
Yep.
what would this, we see like Charles is one. There's no
Yep.
doubt that he has lineage. I've heard, I don't know if it was yourself or someone else in this portion of the internet and biblical thought, state that he's the only one that has like claim to the thrones of Europe, other thrones of Europe. Is that an example of them trying to become a family or the ruling family for the messianic Antichrist, so to speak.
Definitely in part. And I would look at the pedigree of an Antichrist as they would imagine putting him forward to be the king of the world, would have ennobled bloodlines, other bloodlines in there. So we also have King Charles that has the LB gens bloodline. That is more the north side, right? So like from Rollo and back to Odin, that the Sinclairs, the St. Clairs would be part of, the De Bruces would be part of that. William the
Oh,
Conqueror was part of that. And just as you have King Philippe, who is Bourbon of the Anjou bloodline, understanding that the Plantagenets, the junior offshoot of the Anjou, take over and succeed through intermarriage in the time of Prince John and King Richard, the William the Conqueror Norse Albigen's bloodline that's funneling downstream. And King Charles would also take his bloodlines back to, in part, the Stuart um, dynasty, and also in part through Diana, who also had genealogies back to the Stuart dynasty. So those are all sort of part of their genealogies that they're going to take back. And the Stuarts have genealogies that go back to the Merovingians. And the Merovingians are the ones who produced the Anjou with the last survivor of Dagobert that we show up with the Knights Templar founders of de Bouillon, Anjou, folk of Anjou, and de Payon from the Lorraine region. So believe me, they keep these genealogies and pedigrees, but they also, and I think as outlined in the Merovingian line most clearly, is their Nephilim bloodlines is allegorized as a quinotar. Well, we know what a minotaur is. That's like a bull offspring of perhaps likely a cherubim, right? From the one of the four faces of a cherubim. But quinotar is described the same way, but it's different with the name, meaning four horns. So it may be four cherubim bloodlines from different cherubim watchers that has ennobled that, and
oh,
that it
okay.
doesn't, right? And then they also put in bloodlines from the Davidic bloodline that they say is grafted in, um, and from the Benjamite bloodline. And so if you understand how that grafting comes in and as it produced the Knights Templar, you keep that in mind for a second. So how do they get the Benjamite bloodline in their genealogies and belief system? Through the Sicambian Franks, who the Benjamites migrated up and intermarried through, and through Mary Magdalene, because in their belief system, Jesus married Mary Magdalene and didn't die on the cross and produced the bloodline. And then they get the Davidic bloodlines through intermarriage through the Septimanian dynasties, which was basically Jewish based in France for a while, that they intermarried with. So now if you roll that through now as it's coming downstream, that gives them legitimacy. And so you can imagine King Charles and all the bloodlines would try and get Israelite bloodlines of some sort in, that if they're going to deceive the people of Israel and Judah in the end time, and if they are going to have rights to Jerusalem to be crowned there, they want that bloodline pedigree, falsified or not, in their pedigree and their genealogy. So who did Joshua give the rights to Jerusalem to? The Benjamites, which is why the Benjamite bloodline is so important, and why the partial scioning and nobling in of the Benjamite bloodlines into the Merovingians that produced Dagobert, that produced the Bouillon, Payon, and Anjou, with Anjou being crowned in 1018 as the first official king of Jerusalem, and the rights to reign from there through his bloodline back to the Benjamites that they claim. You might imagine Antichrist to have that type of pedigree.
So who would be I'm not asking you to make predictions. We are not about that in this
When's
life.
the rapture?
That's right. We're not those people. We don't have anything. We're not
Yeah, we're
that.
still here, so it
Yeah,
didn't
that's right.
happen.
Yeah.
It's been moved till October, I
October.
bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. They just don't stop.
No. Who would you say, as of the existing, because there is recorded and you elaborate on this in your book to great
Yep.
length in regards to
Yes.
the bloodlines of individual. Who is the contending dominant one today that we see publicly? I know you
Yep.
mentioned earlier, of course, there's probably somebody in the shadows. There's always somebody in
Yep.
the shadows, but kind of the face of that, and we look through history. You've done an excellent job tracking it and
Yep.
showing it throughout history as well. So that would be my next question, I guess,
Well,
regarding this topic.
anybody who's going to hold the King of Jerusalem title, and there's King Philippe Bourbon who owns that title. That started with Baldwin the First in 1118, sorry, with the crowning. And so there are two rivals of Anjou, the Savoy, the royal bloodline of Italy, and the Habsburgs, who used to have the title, as when they inherited through the Lorraine Habsburg dynasty, because the folk of Anjou, de Payan and de Bouillon, as I mentioned earlier, from the Lorraine region. But that marriage came downstream. So you could have one of them in the background. That would be rivals that we may not be all that familiar with, because those bloodlines still exist and they still have an important role. You have King Charles, who has obviously significant bloodlines. But I would suggest that there's a lot of other royals that, may be a bit of a surprise. It doesn't have to be the way the royals would like to have it seen presented. So when Antichrist negotiates the covenant for Babylon in Daniel 9:27, linking that Daniel 9 and Revelation 17, um, Babylon is going to rule over these 10 kings, and these 10 kings in Babylon are going to be ruling through the last 7 years for sure, and Babylon probably a few years before that. She controls these 10 kings that are going to rule, and the little horn is going to grow up amongst them in Daniel 7 and 8 as the unicorn, the single horn, which is why you have unicorn associated in the KJV with the mighty Prince James. To give him that sort of pedigree, because he was maybe envisioning him or his bloodline would be one of those major contenders as they were planning for. So I would say, linking that up, there's an interesting thing is that, this may be a relatively unknown person, because he has to start his rise to fame, as Daniel 11:21 through 31 talks about, to the time of the abomination when he's going to be crowned. And so he's going to lead that off with permitting, in Daniel 9:27, the sacrifice on a wing of a temple, which is going to require universal religion by inference, because Islam is never going to permit that, right? So they have to be subservient to the universal religion. And same as Christianity gets usurped into it. Main organizational structure has to be part of this universal religion that's coming in the end time. And so we might be able to identify this individual or not as part of one of the major, maybe even silent negotiators in behind the scenes who negotiates this covenant. But that's not the revealing or the showing, as to Thessalonians 2 talks about, because as you take those two words back to the Greek, it is without doubt, without any question, this is the Antichrist in his revealing, as those words demonstrate. There is no doubt. There's going to be multiple antichrists before that and even up to the crowning, but this is the singular event that identifies them. That is without dispute, without any reasonable doubt, but not at the signing.
Okay.
Even though we might be able to recognize him, he's not officially that Antichrist. So, but it leaves open the possibility we might not see him until we start to see him rise a little, visibly, with a little bit more prominence. And so that pedigree may not be what is required as the bloodlines have portrayed it. Do I expect he'll have a pedigree? Yes. Do I expect he'll also have a pedigree that includes some Davidic bloodlines or Jesus's alleged bloodlines or Benjamite bloodlines? Probably. But he may not be as pure as what the royales are setting down. And so we want to be very careful that A, we're told by Jesus and also in the epistles of John that there will be multiple antichrists. So we don't want to be just pointing at any one willy-nilly, but there are likely candidates from the visibility factor. And I think it would be restrictive to the Greek and the Roman Empire, just as that little horn comes out of that empire of the 10 kings extended from the Roman one, and similarly through the Greek Empire. And they're basically occupying the same territory for the most part. And Rome was part of the Greek Empire as an extension out of the Greek Empire. So, but that's still a lot of geography from the Middle East to
Take into account.
Greece and
Yeah.
Rome and Egypt and parts of Europe. And so we want to be very, very careful on this. And although there will be other worldwide bloodlines, I wouldn't expect it outside of the Greek and Roman Empire. Um, but again, we're not specifically told who this individual is going to come from, but we know who runs the world today and what they're trying to do.
Where would Apollyon, Apollo? I've heard numerous things, and I don't promote any of it, agree to any
Mm.
of it, any of that. But just it's an interesting thought. I've heard people speak about different places from where these spiritual elements will rise up. So, like I've heard relating to Gog and Magog and the tales of the old London Bridge, and things about it, and now it being in Arizona, like Apollo seat. Where does the names of the false gods and things that are mentioned in Revelation, so like Apollo, where does that come into play in regards to the bloodlines? Is that an example of the the bondage, like you were mentioning in Ezekiel earlier, of in the pit, or is that an entirely different thing
Yeah.
in your
So
studies?
so be careful with Apollo from Apollyon. It's from a same group of Greek words, but not the same word. And Apollo is likely not, Apollo's a sun god, not likely a destroyer god. Um, so you want to be a little bit careful with that. It's more associated with the son of perdition as you look at the Greek words, and that comes out of the Apollyon set of words as well, which is attributed to Antichrist, somehow connected to Abaddon and Apollyon as a destroyer god. So I would be more, if I was linking him, I would link him more to Azazel.
Okay.
He was the destroyer of the antediluvian world. He's the one who taught the arts and crafts of war, according to the book of Enoch, and the technology that would go with it, as we would understand war fought today, as we're catching up to that technology, be akin to Shiva and Mitra of Zoroastrianism and Mithraism, and that Mitra is a god that incarnates like Vishnu does and Shiva does, and is a destroyer god and comes at the end of every age and destroys things as fire and then recreates through that in polytheism, and is said that will incarnate as well in the end time, which is where the title for the Gnostics get Lord Maitreya from. And Lord Maitreya, and you take that back to Indo-Aryan and Sanskrit, it means a bond and an alliance, almost like covenant.
So,
Um, and so Lord Maitreya might be an incarnation of Azazel or Mitra if they're all one and the same. So where does Azazel get locked into? The pit prison in Sheol or Hades, likely in another dimension. And biblically, where is the pit prison in Revelation 9? In the earth, likely in another
right.
dimension. So the short answer to that question is I think when you have the pit prison opened somewhere from minimum 7 months to a year and a half before the midpoint of the last 7 years, you're going to have everything coming out of there, degraded watchers and the terrible ones in the sides of the pit prison. Well, we know that many of these ones and the terrible ones are already in there, right? In Ezekiel 32. And then we have this war with Gog and Magog that happens in the last days, according to Ezekiel 38, which is likely the last 7 years, but at least in the last generation. But typically, it would be understood last days in the Old Testament as the last 7 years, or the 7 years talked about in Daniel 9:27. And some people think it might be the Armageddon War. I don't think so, because in Ezekiel 39, you
Mhm.
have second Exodus, which happens after the burial of the Gog army. And that second Exodus happens in the last 3.5 years. So before second Exodus, in the year of the Lord's favor, and after the start of the last 7 years. And it seems to represent what's being described in Joel 1 and 2 in that war, with the strange sort of locust army, right? And Joel 3 is the Armageddon War. Um, and so the description of this locust army in Joel 1 and 2 is identical to the description of this 200 million man army that's an extension of the first woe of the scorpion-like creatures that are coming out of the pit prison. They're distinct from the angelic beings that are coming out, but these are chimera riders and chimera horses. And you put those descriptions up side by side, and I do that in book 2.
Mhm.
There is no doubt that Joel 1 and 2 and Revelation 9 are talking about this war. So now, who is Gog and Magog? Gog and Magog. Gog doesn't even show up in the Bible from a lineage perspective or a table of nations. Magog does. But as you mentioned, Gog, Magog, and Albion are the giants related to London,
Yeah.
originally created before the flood by the Greek god Iapetus, which is a parent god who ruled before Poseidon. Poseidon likely inherits that mythos, just as he inherits the authority, just as Zeus inherits Cronus's mythos and authority. And so but we also have giants that are named after the flood, after Magog and Gog in the Gyges Kings. So it's a very common name for those Gyges kings to be named that. Why? Because they're giant Herculide bloodline. Um, and that uh, the terrible ones are coming out of the pit prison. So I think there's a relationship between these beings and these spirits that are coming out, who are going to require an oiketarian because they're disembodied spirits.
So they require hosts.
Yes, they
Yes.
need a dwelling place, an oiketarian, as we call that, a soul and a body. So if you're going to provide that, maybe they're provided that in a different type of body that is shown in that army, but still probably a chimera, giant clone type of sleeve or something, however you want to describe it, that they're actually going to lead this army. So when you look at Magog, we do have that showing up, and then that person showing up in Genesis 10, but it's kind of like the Elamites. Whereas that the original name, or did the biblical writers change their name because they intermarried with giants by the same name? Historians say there's two groups of people that merged, the Semites and some Aboriginal race, which were the Elam or the Olamim, the ancient ones from before the flood, which would go to perhaps a survival as you take that back. And similar to the Cadmonim, the Kenazim, and the Kenim, going back to several Hebrew words, but ancient from the east would be those eastern peoples, right? Probably part of the Olamim. So I think there's a connection there, that when we see that happen, that you have these spirits that are going to be active again in the end time after they're released, at least for the Gog War and probably for the Armageddon War after that. So I think it's important to sort of distinguish between different locations around the earth than to where they would be located at. And if we're looking for a specific location, Yeah, I'm not sure where we would want to do that. I mean, you have so many good candidates. Um, but the best known one biblically, and I think what you were alluding to would be at Mount Hermon, where the Council of Gods was, where Baal came back and forth every day between the other world and the earth to inspect his empire. And that was by the Pan Temple, the cave, which is known as the gateway to Hades, or the gateway to Sheol. So if there was a location, perhaps there, but they could be coming through portals all over the world as they flood out. I mean, we just don't know where that's going to come from. And the occult mythology has many portals around the world and many accesses to the underworld.
Uh, so with that, the you mentioned Mount Hermon again. I want to ask about another kind of a biblically mentioned council of the gods, which is Psalms 82. How
Yeah.
does so God acknowledges this false pantheon in a sense in the
Yep.
Bible. We see this acknowledgement of like pantheonal hierarchy. I don't think that was a word. And so in that, can you elaborate on that? Because I believe Psalms 82 kind of goes with the what you're the prison in Greek mythology, the Tartarus prison and everything. So uh
Yeah, the pit prison does go, I think, with the Tartarus
right.
polytheist account because it's a prison. It's in the underworld.
Humorous note,
It's
and it might
yeah,
just be a 90s
yeah.
thing. Have you ever seen the cartoon Hercules, Gary?
The Disney
The
one?
Disney
No,
cartoon?
I haven't. No.
There's at least a scene in there that is they told our entire generation the truth.
Yep.
There's a
Yeah.
scene in there. It's an animated scene. John, I can't. It's not important.
Yep.
The guy who plays Hades, his character, he goes and he opens up the Tartarus prison,
Yep.
and the Cyclops, just like in Greek mythology, and
Hmm.
these other items come out. So
Yep.
even in the false pantheon, they tell the truth, and they've told us as children growing up the truth, right? So my question though was, how does the counsel of God in Psalms 82
Yep.
uh, how does that relate to the pit prison and that structural? And then the B part of that question is when those spirits are released from the prison, um, how does that merger look? Will we see centaurs, minotaurs, things like that again, you believe? Or is it more from a spiritual, occupational aspect of it?
Yeah, good questions. And so, Tartarus is also used in 2 Peter
Hmm.
3 for hell.
Yeah.
That's Tartarus, and it's talking about where um, fallen angels went for their sins, right? So there's definitely a relationship there, but that's not the council of the gods, the
Right,
Tartarus
right, right,
or the
right.
pit prison.
I was just asking the
So
relation to it. Like if
yeah,
as far as
but you can expect that most of those ones that are in there from a fallen angelic perspective were on the ruling council,
that's yes,
right?
sir. That's what I was
Yes.
asking.
So when we look at the council of gods in Psalms 82, that's the council of the gods, Elohim, plural for El, for an angel or a god. And God walks amongst us. These are not loyal angels. And God judges that council, but they're the ones that rule even to this day, likely at Mount Hermon. And they will rule until the end time, till Armageddon, when that is overthrown with the battle at Mount Hermon. Um, and so the Council of Gods rules over the 70 nations. And where do we get the 70 nations? Well, let's roll over to Deuteronomy 32. So these are the nations that are ruled over by the sons of Israel. That's not um, necessarily the translation that we should understand. It might be part of it, but it's numbered by the 70 nations as it comes out of the sons of Israel born in Egypt in Exodus 1:5 with the number 7 and the 70 patriarchs in the table of nations. And then the sons of Adam before the flood were also numbered in a similar manner. So there would have been 70 sons of Adam, but they're not named in the Bible. You have to make that connection that it's consistent. And so it's not that the KJV, when it translates the sons of Israel there, is incorrect. But the Septuagint says angels, and the Aramaic versions coming out says sons of God. None are wrong. Jacob inherits the title Israel after wrestling with God, and everybody says, well, that means wrestling with God. Yes, that's how we understand it, but it's made up of two words, Israel, Sarah and El. El meaning an angel or a god or the God most high, and Sarah meaning a prince or a ruler. So it's Ben Sarah El in the original Hebrew, as would have been there, because Israel wasn't before the flood. They weren't even there at the table of nations, right? So either there's a big conflict here or we haven't understood it properly. So it should be understood as the meaning of the word, just as Halel should be translated as the name and not the meaning of the word there, because it's not a specific angel there. And so it should be translated as sons of the ruling God. So that's who rolls over from the council of the gods. And Israel will be accounted for with those 70 sons throughout the millennium after the second Exodus. That's the prophetic side to that sort of aspect of it. So this is a separate ruling council from the angels that are in the pit prison. So when we look at the word host of heaven that we talked about before, Hebrew Saba, meaning an army of angels that has rank and order, when any of the angels were sentenced to the pit prison, yet other ones move up. That's who Psalms 82 is talking about, the ones that have moved up to continue to rule over. And these are the invisible ones, who the visible ones and their hierarchy report to. Why? Because they're all offspring of the invisible ones, and continue to do their bidding on the earth and try and bring about the end time.
So I know we're running low on time, but I just wanted to. So how do the secret societies, the Masons, the skull and crossbones, how do they tie into this?
Yeah, it's a prehistoric beginning that needs to be sort of understood. So when you get into the Polychronicon and or the history of Freemasonry, that history of Freemasonry pulls their information out of, written by Albert Mackey in the 1850s, the craft begins before the flood. The Masonic, and not Freemason, but the ancient term is Masonic and Royal Masons. So it begins before the flood, and in the time of Enoch to Lamech, Jubal, Jabal, Tubal, Cain, and Nama. And when the seven sciences are established, the knowledge that Enoch learns from Cain, who learned from Adam, that he used to run this massive agriculture facility, versus the nomads who were wandering the earth, which were more gatherers than agriculture, and with only two people. This knowledge was split into seven sciences we would know as the seven sacred sciences or the seven liberal arts today. You've got grammar, you've got rhetoric, you've got um,
Mathematics.
dialectics, yeah, you've got math, you've got astronomy, you've got music, you've got geometry, and astronomy. Should be seven in there. I've got them all right, and I think I do. That is then going to be put into a sun worshiping bull cult, and then it's going to merge with the knowledge of the angels, and then they're going to be teaching this knowledge to only the elite, the Elim, because they're the only ones who have the right to know it, and the rest are mundane. So that's why they have an initiatory religion, initiatory secret societies out of the mystery schools, where this knowledge based religion teaches the sciences. You have an establishment of the secret societies as an extension out of them. And so when you look at universities today, you've got like Skull and Bones as an Ivy League extension out. You have Alpha House, Beta House, and the minions of other initiatory organizations that model the old system. But from a Masonic perspective, it's for the higher pseudo blue bloods, it would be the skull and bones that would answer into the Illuminati in terms of the hierarchy and the Thelemic tree trunk. So this organization crosses the flood and will be restarted at Babel through Hermes, who finds the knowledge hidden under the pyramid and takes that knowledge to, this is according to the Masons, takes it to Nimrod, who writes the first Masonic constitution after the flood, uses the knowledge to build Babel City and Babel Tower and whatever technology is also being used there. And he's recognized as the first Grand Master. Nimrod is after the flood by the Masons. And the secret societies are sort of reborn at Babel, attached to the religion and attached to those who are going to start the nations and marry in with the giants. And then that secret society hierarchy is entrenched into the top two classes throughout history. So when you roll it forward to the time of de Bouillon, all of the 9 and 11, as the inside records show, of people starting the Templars were not poor monks. They're all royals, right? And the Templars become the modern secret society in a centralized version that is going to create banking and basically be working a lot of control within the Catholic Church. And then when they get split up in 1307, the Royals are basically saying, and there's a split in 1188 where you have the start of the Rosicrucians with a split of the Priory of Sion from the junior order of the Knights Templars, which is why you don't have Grand Masters before that listed. You have to take the Grand Masters of the senior and the junior order, right, all the way back to the start of the Templars with that sort of succession. You have this order of invisible ones, as they would call themselves, and the visible 33, who are saying we're not going to be split up so easily with a central organization. We're now going to create other organizations like the Rosicrucians, like the Freemasons, like the Illuminati. You're going to have the Invisible 33, the Council of 33, split downwards with the Committee of 300 Families, and they're going to populate the top half of the Rosicrucians, and then split a little bit up again to the top 13 families as they set up that hierarchy. So when you look at those orders of royals that I'm talking about at that level, they're either going to be in the Invisible 33 or the Council of 33 or in the 13 families. And they have their own royal knight order still to this day. And as you get down to the Rosicrucians, you have 50% purebloods populating the top half, and then you have the ones that are lower pseudo blue bloods who are rising up through Freemasonry, first level of the adept in Freemasonry, third degree, 33 degrees, Illuminati, and then into the Rosicrucians. That's the bottom half, as those ones are selected to rise up. And then you have all of the branch organizations in this tree trunk branch organizational structure that they call the Thelemic tree that they organize. And you can't use a pyramid because you run out of slots with all of these organizations. So if you want to know where, let's say, the Bohemian Grove would link into, Illuminati. If you want to know where the Council of the World Economic Council would funnel into, it would be the Committee of 300, the Davos Group, IMF, anything monetary trade, that aspect goes into the Committee of 300. The Jesuits, if you notice, I didn't put them in the tree trunk order. They're known as
the whole thing, right?
no, they're not. They're just a small piece, an important piece. The Jesuits are the New Templars, reinstated into the Catholic Church to replace them through Ignatius of Loyola, who's sponsored by Francis Borgia, head of the Montesa order, which was the replacement order of the Knights Templar in Spain to keep the assets. And he's a Royal Basque that's in the court of the the Holy Roman Emperor of the time of Spain, and Borgia is also a bloodline of popes as well. He's a grandson of a pope, and he's going to sponsor the Jesuits into order. And then he's going to join the Jesuits, and by 1565, he becomes the third Grand Master. So you have the Royale controlling it, and their job is to create the new Babylon within the Roman Church, just as that was the goal of the Knights Templar. And then they're also going to get control in the early 1570s in partnership with the King of Spain to get the banking, because they bankrupt the Vatican with invasions into Italy. And the banking goes to the Jesuit control, and then move that over to Switzerland, where most of the riches of the Templars went after the fall in 1307. Then later, the Rothschilds, who were created for banking outside the church, set up their operations in Switzerland so that they can keep their money off the books, so that nobody knows how much they have, which is unimaginable how much that they have. So they would enter in at, depending on how you define the black nobility of Italy. There's two black nobilities. One is the junior order, which are the ones that migrated from the Middle East, mostly Tyre and Phoenicia regions, settled into the cities like Venice and Florence, and were more merchant orientated. They would be considered the junior black nobility, like the Medicis, for example. And so the senior black nobility takes their genealogies back to the 100 senator families that used to rule Rome. You might imagine the Julia gens and the Claudius gens, and perhaps there's might even be a Maximus gens, as I've heard told to me. But there's genses for each of those lines as they break out. And those 100 families go back to Romulus and Remus, who are the offspring of Ares and or Mars in the Latin pantheon. And so the original ones are created by the royales of the black nobility in partnership with the black nobility, the larger black nobility of Europe, the other royales, to create the Templars within the church. But the Jesuits are disbanded in the early 1800s. Why? Because they get out of line from the goals of the royales, and the Jesuits are actually assassinating royales and doing political intrigue and things like that. So they're disbanded. Problem is the royals start to imprison the popes in France. And so the popes reinstate the Jesuit order to help get some protection for themselves and a little bit of autonomy. And so they're reinstated and supported by the junior black nobility to do so. So who's in control of them? Either the Committee of 300, where the junior would be part of, but the black nobility would populate part of the Council of 33 and some of the 13 families.
Okay. So we have the current state is the to recap briefly, the Nephilim work today in the form of their hybridized descendants in regards to what is now easily identified, not easily identified, but easily attributed the term the bloodlines and the things you were just speaking to. And they really are the ones who have enslaved society, and it all boils down to the usurpation of the roles of creation, and our relationship with God, and the desire of control and power. And so when it comes to these societies, they're like funnels to the top of these organizations. You mentioned like frat houses, sororities.
Yep.
That's kind of, we can look at it as like the one of the lower places, and it's all funnels up to, in regards to purity, like blood quantifying and everything. So, if you're of someone down here or born down here, go to a frat house, they, like spiritually, they keep track of these things. There's the
Yes.
invisible aspect and the marking of, I'm sure there's lots of little bastard families that have been marked for the purpose of genetics or rebreeding or something like that.
Yes.
And go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with what you're
Oh,
saying.
okay.
I guess the only last question I have is what would you tell people watching, Christians, and what should we be doing with this information?
In yes, in
Well,
regards to the vigilance of the
Application.
day
yeah,
and the
yeah,
commands of God to educate and inform.
yeah. And I think when you see our discussion and understand the discussion that we're talking about this on a global scale. So there's more than the Western bloodlines, right? There's bloodlines all over the world. Xi would be one of the important bloodlines to watch from the Shah dynasty and the dragon creator gods. Um, so if you want to understand how the world works, you have to understand how it was built. If you want to understand what's going on with the geopolitics today, you have to understand who's pulling the strings on the geopolitics. Not listen, we do not want to listen to what the news media is telling us is happening. Some of the details will be correct, but not the larger picture would be correct. And so if we are indeed heading into the end time, and I think we might be in the fig tree generation by indication, then we should see some strange things going on. And I think we are with as
Yeah.
being in the period of the sorrows. And there has to be a sort of a rise that of these 10 kings and 10 empires of the world. That's going to be the new Atlantis of 10 kings, right? Um, just as we have 10 horns and 10 kings and 10 toes, all the same allegory for the same end time empire in Bible prophecy. So there's going to have to be a geopolitical working that's here. Plus, we're going to have to see a rise of Babylon as well with its universal religion. So we should be seeing some of those pangs because all of this comes about through the sorrows as these disasters. And if people aren't familiar with the birth pangs or the sorrows, there are earthquakes, which we know are increasing in number and in intensity. There are wars and rumors of wars as the second sorrow. We have pestilence, which we saw one that expect more of that and to get more potent, and famine. And they'll start to work interchangeably or together as this starts to get worse so that you can have the false prophets enter the field. We have the false prophets of science out there today. Understanding science as we understand it today comes from the seven sacred sciences, the wisdom of the world. So they have part of that going, but not the sort of quote unquote religious order that's in place with true false prophets. But we see they're products of global warming, overpopulation, all of that comes out of the science community who are playing their part. Pharmakeia, sorcery, is going to be a significant part of that, and we're being drugged to death. So expect that to be to get worse as we sort of again try and understand how we get here and how it relates to prophecy. So when we look at the Western bloodlines, they have been trying to establish their new world order that I like to call an Nephilim world order for a very long period of time and are continually frustrated. And they're getting ever more frustrated. And now you have people pushing back like Trump. You have people pushing back like Putin, people pushing back like Xi. And what they're basically all saying, and maybe for different motivations, but what they're all basically saying to the Europeans is we don't disagree with a new world order, but not subservient to you and by your rules and your structure. And so we are going to demand or take our position on that and our rightful empires. So I would expect to see a rise of alliances, and in some cases, some new alliances. And it's going to be in the form of trading blocks, economic zones, military zones, political cooperation zones, and that you're going to see 10 of those show up. And it's going to happen through the combination of these calamities and the empire building because they believe we're in the end time too. And they want to have that dynasty that's going to rule over the world. But before you can have the one kingdom, you're going to have the end time empire. So they're going to have to form this union that conveniently divides the world into 10 groups of nations, just as the Club of Rome did when they were created in the early 70s or late 60s, because they were so frustrated at the pace that they were on. It wasn't getting there fast enough for them. Or as the UN has divided the world up a few times into 10 groups of nations. It's going to arrive there somehow, some way, maybe not exactly in the form that those other organizations have grouped, but they have to start taking shape if we're in there. And lo and behold, we have a fellow like Putin who's trying to recreate the Romanov dynasty, is what he had told Tucker, who believes he's a Putianin of the Putianin bloodline of the original czars in Kiev, which is the holy city for him. And Moscow is a branch city established by Vladimir the Great, who Putin also commemorates, Vladimir the Great, and that he imagines himself as one of those 10 kings, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So again, if we think that Trump is going to stop him from invading the Ukraine, not. He's going to continue until he gets his way. And we're going to have to see some more of these catastrophes for these economic zones to come together. So you can have a financial disaster or a trading war that can help form those blocks. Well, we're seeing the Golden Age Trump, which is a word for the antediluvian Atlantean world, through tariffs and other disputes as part of that, or financial disaster might do that. We're seeing a need for ramping up of militarization around the world and alliances because of what China and Russia are doing and what Trump is doing. And so you'll see other nations and group of nations start to react to that. And you should look, I think, in part of the allegory for the 10 toes of iron and clay of the seventh empire. So I mixed the beast and the metallic empires of Daniel 2, 7, and 8, and with Revelation 13 and 17, is that you're going to have, like Rome, which had Rome as the center, Constantinople as the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, you have the toes on separate legs as well. So expect two groups of five. That's not the complete allegory. I think there's more in there, and there definitely is more in there with the iron and clay. And so we're starting to see five kind of rise through the BRICS countries. And we see them establishing their own currencies. We see them establishing their own credit cards, their own banks, and will not be trading as much with Europeans and North America. So I think we're starting to see some of that sort of come together. And it starts to help us understand the alliance of the Gog War in Ezekiel 38 and 39 through that sort of lens as well. Now, China is not going to be part of that Gog War, but look for Russia to be part of that. Moscow's etymological root comes from Meshech, as in Gog, chief prince of Magog, Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. And that you have the Persians, which we would understand as Iranians and Iraqis and a few other countries, but also understand that those Indo-Aryan Persians, Persians was one branch of Indo-Aryans, which also settled in the Indus Valley, which is India. India buys all of its oil from Russia for the most part, and is increasingly moving in that direction. So again, if we want to look at what's going on with the wars in the world, look for who's pulling these strings. And also understand that those who have the war gene, the descendants, this is what they do. They've done this war and warrior aspect right from the beginning and will continue to do so right through to the end. And look for these sorrows to be contrived catastrophes, similar to the pestilence that we had the last go around. Same as the wars that start. That's not natural. So you can have created pestilence through biological warfare that's being created that would work together, or other types of pestilences that can come through mutated or created viruses. You can have famine that comes out of that. Earthquakes can create the same types of scenario. So you start to see some things that are working together, and who knows what they're doing to the crust and the core to actually cause more earthquakes, along with change having the ability, as Brennan said in 2018 or 19, that they have the ability to change weather. But there's too much flack coming from other countries because they don't like to have their weather changed. Well, of course they wouldn't, but they're developing it for a weapon of war. So expect that to sort of continue, but you can't get an understanding of what's going on unless you understand how the world is run, and that you can't imagine of what it's going to look like unless you understand what happened in history and prehistory, because nothing is new under the sun, and what was will be again. And the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow. And what's also interesting is in Daniel 2:42, as we talk about these bloodlines, and I'm not saying there won't be real giants, because we have to be open to the fact that somehow, some way, survival and stasis, recreation, or receiving giant bodies for their oiketerian spirit to dwell in. Daniel 2:42, in the time of those 10 kings, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, the 10 kings of the beast empire that were all beast giant bloodlines. There's still a seed line war that's still going on here, and they're determined to destroy humans from the face of the earth.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and segue to the hope of humanity, and that is that there is a price that's paid, and to understand the full weight of Christ's atonement and sacrifice, these kind of things play hand in hand. None of this is
Well,
uh,
well, I'll just interject too,
go
because I
ahead.
probably should have put this in earlier, is that had the fallen angels knew about the crucifixion, they wouldn't have had known about the resurrection, they wouldn't have had Jesus crucified. And that's the princes of this world, archons. Um, so they didn't know about the resurrection. So they thought they had won. And what's interesting is Jesus goes into the grave, I think, to announce to them, hey, your rule is over. And what's also interesting about that is that Ephesians 4 is talking about this time when Jesus is in the grave, and he's going to parade them out. And Colossians 2:8, I think, says this is a spectacle. And what Paul is talking about in Ephesians 4 is an exact quote as to what's going on in Psalms 68. So you get all of the details in Psalm 68. He's actually parading these individuals out while he's still in the grave to Mount Hermon to pronounce the denunciation on them that their war is over, and making a spectacle with them before returning them back to the pit prison to await the end time.
Which is a total boss move. Like, if you don't
Yeah,
understand what Gary's talking about, like, and the full context of when Jesus said, "Upon this rock I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail," there's a
yeah.
reason that Catholicism hijacked that. It's because it detracts from the weight of what you just said. Christ literally forewarned them, "You're about to get your butt whooped." And it was in
And
such a,
and
go
and
ahead.
and at Mount Hermon.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's one
Yeah.
of my favorite things when I'm teaching
Yeah.
through the scriptures to point out is where Jesus gave that declaration was that's a gate to hell. That's a sacrifice. Orgies were
Yeah.
done there, all kinds of nasty stuff because it was a spiritual portal kind of thing. And they fed off that too. And so he whooped them and made a spectacle of them. And it's real bluntly, and not to detract from any of it, but it's no different than rubbing a dog's nose in something. He now go back. And it was a powerful action that you don't fully comprehend if you don't understand the weight of what happened on Genesis 6.
Yeah. And Mount Hermon isn't its original name. In
No.
the Ugaritic text, it's called Saphon.
Hmm.
Biblically, other nations called it Sirion, Shinir, and Sion.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of the holy mountains of God that the fallen angels desecrated. And that's where they swore their oath, Haram Anathema,
Mhm.
to create the giants and to carry it out to the end, no matter what the consequences. Haram there is the Hebrew word harem, Cheram, and there's a couple of variations of it. All means curse and accursed, and that's the name that Herman derives from.
Right. It
And so that's
literally
the
got
mountain
called
of
the
mountain of
cursed
the curse.
mountain. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you don't understand that biblical context if you're not willing to break away, as you've coined the term, and it's my favorite thing, and you don't partake in the contrarian mindset of what the theologians and things have established. You don't fully grasp the weight of salvation either. And so I don't think it's salvific to know this information, but I think that it adds to the weight and the appreciation of the gift of our salvation a millionfold, knowing these
And
things.
yeah, and only by knowing that do you understand our reason for being.
Right.
I mean, we are created as a resolution to the angelic rebellion, and their reaction to that was the creation of the giants to destroy us.
Right. Like we are far more important, but in that aspect than we've been led to believe in a scriptural standpoint. So, Gary, we would like to have you on again in the future to continue because I've listened to over 100 hours of you, so we know we have it in you. Um, and so, can you just shout out people where to find you and things? I saw that you recently started up a YouTube channel again, or maybe somebody did for you.
Oh,
Um,
somebody's always starting one
yeah,
for me. No, I have
no,
not.
because you used to have quite a good YouTube following and several years ago.
Wasn't me.
No, never was.
Never
No,
was. I did
wow.
actually create a channel, but I've never used it because I haven't had time.
Right.
So,
It'd be a good place
um,
to put all your podcasts that you get to go on.
So
yeah,
where can people find
Yeah,
you?
where can we then?
yeah, the best way to find me is through my website, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, there's a contact the author. Just have to be patient. As I say, I think I said earlier, I have about a 3 month backlog on emails to hopefully someday catch up on, but I will get to them. So be patient. And yeah, so you'll find something that's odd on most of those YouTube channels that are fake Gary Wayne YouTube channels. They'll do capital letters this way and that way and do something that's odd just in the look. So if they're just showing the YouTube video, fine, but it's not me. I'm not going to be the one responding there.
Good to know. And then you can Google his or YouTube his name, and he's on
Every
every
podcast.
podcast you can
And
think of.
books are available on Amazon and Audible and straight from your website
Like,
as well.
correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And a fiction about to come out in next year sometime that I'm working with called uh, the Aprimo Conspiracy, and it's about how AI plays into the end time, and based on my chronology of the end time, but all fictional characters. So kind of like a Da Vinci Code sort of concept or a mythopoetic about real events, different characters, organizations, and just about how it would play in the beginning. And we'll see whether or not we do a sequel to that.
Well, hopefully we can
Hope
discuss
so.
that maybe on the next time we have
Yeah.
you on. That'd be wonderful. I can't wait to read that. So I want to give the hope of the gospel because we've talked about some serious things, and that's whether the information you have is great or small. Know this: the atonement has been given. The blood price has been paid for your sins and mine, and that it was paid on Golgotha by the Mashiach, by Christ Jesus, and that upon his death, burial, and resurrection, death was defeated, and the schemes of the enemy, everything Gary's talked about, was defeated upon his resurrection and his ascension to the right hand of the Father. So there he sits, waiting to judge the hearts of men, because the judgment of the earth and the world and the things thereof has already been deemed. So choose this day whom you will serve, for there is only one worth serving. As for us in our homes, we shall serve the Lord and his anointed Jesus Christ. Go in the grace and the peace of our Lord and Savior.
All right, everybody.
Amen.
That's the show. That's Gary Wayne. Give it up for Gary Wayne, everybody.
Hold on, it's this one.
We're out.